Joining us in the studio to talk through the big stories of the day and, of course, the week, Nikki Hodgson, journalist and author. Morning, Nikki.
Morning.
And Sophia Worringer, who is the Deputy Policy Director at the Centre for Social Justice. Morning to you.
Morning.
So where do we start? World War III. Let's start with that. Nice light subject for you. It looks very much like Keir Starmer won't be returning from America with this great big announcement that we're going to be allowing Ukraine to fire these long-range UK-produced missiles that we will supply into Russia. Where do you stand on that? Do we go forward and try and, throw more at this, or do we take a more reserved look at this, Nikki?
It's a de-escalation strategy because Putin is a psychopath. And it's not about the politics of whether it's right or wrong to give Ukraine the capacity to use these long-range missiles. It's all about avoiding World War III, as we've mentioned. That's what Starmer and Joe Biden are trying to do. Now, morally, it might seem completely repugnant. It does to me. I would like to have this war end for the sake of the Ukrainians. I don't want to watch more Ukrainians die. But it's about de-escalation for the safety of others.
So you think firing longer-range missiles that the UK provides, which Putin himself has said that would be an escalation and that they would respond appropriately to the NATO countries that provide this, you think that actually that's a de-escalation?
No, I'm saying
strategy?
I'm saying not allowing them to use the missiles is de-escalation. Sitting in this position of we can't really let you, even though morally it's the correct thing to do.
So you don't think we should give these missiles?
I don't think right now.
OK, all right. What about you?
I do agree, because while we want Ukraine to win, Ukraine has to win. If Putin has been very clear that he would see this as a provocation of a NATO country supplying weapons and he would retaliate to NATO as a bloc, then that puts us in a very dangerous situation. We already have in the English Channel Russian military boats moving in a very ominous way and being shadowed by our Navy, thankfully, but making comments like Britain needs to sink, and we just can't afford to escalate it. However, Ukraine needs to be supported to win, but we may need to adjust what our idea of winning looks like, because the stalemate is just going to go on forever.
But
otherwise.
Zelensky today, front page of The Times, saying President Zelensky accusing the West of emboldening Putin in the US if the US put off this decision on arming Ukraine with long-range missiles. And you can see that argument, can't you? Putin comes on television, gives an interview in the street, which is very rare on Russian television, to say, this would be an escalation. If this happens, it's a huge escalation. And the West immediately says, oh, OK, well, then we will maybe hold off. How does NATO maintain its credibility if it doesn't go full steam ahead and hand over these missiles?
Because what NATO does, presumably what's happening behind closed doors, there's another plan, which is all about arming Zelensky in Ukraine, that we don't know about, purposefully, that is not going to be talked about in the international news, purposefully, to offset Putin's anger. That is strategy that has to be employed to protect the lives of thousands of people.
But that's not where he needs them. He needs them to be fired into these Russian targets, especially...
No. I'm talking about the difference between what we're hearing in the press today and what will be going on as an arrangement behind closed doors.
These missiles might be provided without us knowing then?
Yes, I'm sure. I'm sure at some point they will be, but this is not the point to give them.
But if you look at the map of Russia, the strategic military targets that Zelensky and Ukraine want to hit with these missiles are about 150 miles, I think, into Russia. So there would be no way of hitting those targets without the current missiles they have. So I don't. I mean, I get what you're saying, and I agree that there are certainly things that go on that we don't know about, and troops from different countries that are in there that we might not know about. But I don't see how long-range missiles that have a certain capacity with distance can be hidden.
Well, they can't be hidden, but what I'm trying to say is...
How we could not know about that if they were there.
But right now, the strategy, because Putin does not obey international law, he does not play by humanitarian rules, the strategy right now has to be to de-escalate, whether he's telling the truth or calling our bluff. That is
But
when
how do you
when you are
de-escalate
dealing with somebody who is so unhinged and really doesn't care either way. You know, all he cares about is end game, and he'll get there however he wants. And we hope because Rena, you must know as a doctor. Actually, I'm thinking about this. Obviously, it's very dangerous to diagnose people on air and all that kind of thing. But he doesn't come across as the most balanced person, does he? As the most reasonable kind of guy.
Well, you could just say he's coming across as an autocratic leader of his country.
Which takes a certain psychological mindset, right?
Oh, it looks like we've got one now, so...
I mean, I wonder whether, and again, I say this respectfully, you are being, by just throwing around these terms like he's a sort of psychopath.
No, I'm not
kind of
throwing it around.
But I wonder whether he in his mind, I think it's really important to understand the mindset of one's enemy.
Yes.
And he in his mind is acting in a way that is protecting the interests of Russia, which has seen NATO expand on its doorstep for the last 3 decades.
But
now,
he in his mind is acting as someone that cares above anything else about power, supreme power.
No, I disagree. I think it's a bit of
I don't think he's protective. I don't think he cares at all about Russian people.
He's protecting Russia.
No, he thinks that he's got some kind of God-given right to be this, you know, in his head, world leader, and ideally leader of the world, if he could be.
I see. I don't know. Sophia, what do you think about that?
I think that the problem is that, yes, we agree he's a volatile person, but I do think he has strategy behind his actions. I do think that he wants to push back the borders of Russia. The problem is we don't know where he wants to end. And I think that is what Ukraine is finding now, that they will need to agree potentially a settlement of a border that is going to be sacrificing on both sides.
And it's going to sacrifice some of Ukraine.
Exactly, and that is ridiculously hard, but that is not a decision that America or the UK can make for the people of Ukraine. That is a decision they have to make, in fact, Zelensky has to make.
Do we not need to acknowledge the West, if they are involved in this decision, should be? Because the West has been fiddling around in Ukraine for a long time now, so don't we have a responsibility in some way, shape or form, whether it's to arm Ukraine, whether it's to be involved in what Ukraine looks like at the end of this? I wonder if we have no involvement, whether we are abandoning a country that even the NATO website has pages and pages of our cooperation with Ukraine.
At the moment, we almost have the worst case scenario where Ukraine is not armed enough to win, but they're not armed enough to pull out. So we have this stalemate which has no end in sight, which is just causing thousands of lives to be lost. So that's
just before we go to a break.
To both of you, we're talking about a stalemate, but not one person in this debate is using the word peace. And how we get to peace.
Because at the minute, it doesn't seem that we can get there, does it? Because I completely agree with you, actually, Sophia, on this, even though I'm probably not meant to agree with you, that stalemate, I mean, the idea is that Russia will eventually run out of money and the rest of the world, or the rest of the West, certainly, will fund Ukraine. That seems to be the strategy at the minute employed by Britain, America and everybody else in Europe.
OK, when we return, we'll talk a little more about this, and I will come to you, Sophia. And we'll also talk about the winter fuel allowance and this latest assessment about who exactly is going to suffer. That's next on Talk. Hello there, it's Christo here on Talk. Typing away, doing my research this morning on Russia and Ukraine for you, so that you don't have to. And we're solving the war this morning in the studio. We've got in the studio with you Nikki Hodgson, journalist and author, and Sophia Worringer, who is Deputy Policy Director at the Centre for Social Justice, and Dr. Renee is here. So, Sophia, I'll come to you first on this, because you didn't get a chance to reply before, but also I'd like you to tell me, why do you think Putin is doing this? Why do you think Putin... We're talking about this, by the way, because of the missile story and whether we supply these missiles, but I'm going to come to you both on this, but why do you think Putin is doing this?
Well, he wants to win, doesn't he? And he doesn't want to lose the territories that they've been fighting over for this past time, and he thinks that this will intimidate the West. But what do you think is
the bigger picture is?
Well, I think he just wants to expand his borders. As you said, he wants to... parts of Ukraine he feels are Russian, wrongly, the Ukrainian people would say, but he feels should be part of his country and not part of Ukraine. And he's spun this story as well, which he has been very successful in selling the war to the people within Russia, that Ukraine is run by Nazis, and therefore he has this moral crusade to stamp out fascism in this part of the country. So I think that he is trying to expand his power and therefore kind of prove to the Russian people that he's a strong leader and that he's got their interests at heart. He does also say that he feels threatened by the expansion of NATO, and again, that's been part of the reason why he's been able to sell the war to the people in Russia. He said that they're going to come for us.
Do you think there's any truth in that, though? I made the point before, and I'm not sure how you would feel about this, but would it take a massive sale to the people of Russia if we imagine what it would be like here, and sovereign Ireland decided to have a military pact with China, sovereign France decided to have a military pact with China, sovereign Germany, Spain, Portugal, if all these countries around the UK, Scotland even, though it's part of the UK, but you get my drift, that if sovereign nations around the United Kingdom started to make a military pact with what is seen as one of our enemies, at what point would it be a massive sale to the British people for us to say, well, hang on, what's going on over here? We wouldn't stand for that, would we?
Well, as a comms line, yeah, I guess it's effective. It makes people feel like they're under threat, and that is the best way to gather people.
Would we not feel
around.
under threat if that's the case? I mean, rather than it being a comms line, actually, would we not feel under threat?
Well, we have to remember that the ability to stop the war is in the hands of Putin. At any point, he could retract, he could remove his troops, and he has that power. So he holds the power, unfortunately, in this situation.
Would it not be a fair assessment to say, though, that the ability to foresee this conflict on the horizon was in the hands of the West for a long time? And again, these are sovereign nations, they have every right to join NATO. However, at what point should the West have predicted that something like this might have happened?
Well, I think there were rumblings for a long time. Obviously, we had the annexing of Crimea, and that showed.
Before then?
Yeah, well, even before then, it was clear that he had this expansionist agenda, and that he wanted. Russia has always had this history of wanting to be this kind of superpower in the East and setting itself up against the West. And obviously, that psyche and history goes back a long way, before the Cold War, before the World Wars, even to like Peter the Great and others. You know, it's something about the Russian history that is very keen to their identity. So yes, in some ways, antagonism has always existed. But the problem we have now is that the West, as I've said, is not giving enough support for Ukraine to win, but giving enough for the conflict to continue. So peace looks like it's very far away.
Why do you think, Nikki, that Putin is doing this? And to what extent should the West take responsibility for what has led to... by the way, Putin is repellent. Putin is awful for doing this. I don't want anyone to, mistake my asking these questions as any kind of support. But I just think it's important to realise how we got here. So, to what extent do you think the West needs to take responsibility for not foreseeing this happening? And why do you think Putin's doing this?
Well, I don't think it's that we didn't foresee it. It's more that we hoped it wouldn't happen, and we tried not to escalate it. And then he panicked. This is what I believe happened. He panicked because he's coming towards the end of his life. He wants to leave this legacy of him being the greatest Russian leader that ever lived, whether you agree with that being possible or not. And I think it's a psychological thing with him, that he is feeling threatened, he's feeling vulnerable because he's ageing, and his operations in Russia and outside of Russia are an extension of his psyche.
How could we have hoped that this wouldn't happen if we were, with country after country after country around Russia, accepting them either being within NATO or having huge amounts of cooperation with NATO? I mean, are we that thick that we didn't think that, we go, oh, well, fingers crossed, another country would tick off being in NATO just on Russia's border, practically?
Sure, well, you can call it naive, but I think what probably lots of Western countries hoped is that he just accept it, because he'd think, oh, well, maybe this is the balance of power and maybe I shouldn't do anything to, go after the West as a result of it.
But respectfully, I think that's something of a contradiction, because if we are going to accept that perhaps he's a little bit unhinged and power-hungry, as you were saying before, yet we are hoping that he would rationally accept these sovereign places that are accepting part of NATO.
Sure.
It's either complete naivety or a choice by the West to say, well, you know what, we want to have the balance of power in our favour and we don't give two hoots whether he cares or not.
Well, I think some of it is also to do with his relationship with China, and also to do with the relationship that he had with Donald Trump. So because there seemed to be a little bit of friendliness there, I think we fell into this false sense of security, that he was manageable.
But then
and that's part of Donald Trump's, that's part of Donald Trump's shtick, that he is the person to stand up to Putin, which is something he's repeating again.
Again, is it not a fair assessment to believe that he would make alliances with other powerful nations if it was obvious that the West... I mean, let's not forget within this, there were at least 2, maybe even 3 occasions in the last probably 40 years, actually, in fairness, where Russia wanted to join NATO. And they were refused.
Yes, and obviously because it's an endless prisoner's dilemma gameplay, isn't it, with Putin?
Would you, if you were Putin, say, well, OK, then I've tried the nice way. I've tried to say, can I be a part of this alliance? No, you can't. But this alliance what obvious reasons?
Well, obvious reasons that he's always been unstable and unpredictable.
Why couldn't
since he was in the KGB, since he was a child. Remember that story that we've all heard about Putin, about his dad, hitting him to teach him a lesson about you've got to get the first punch in? It's like his whole psyche is built on he'll do whatever it takes to survive and to be the boss.
Why couldn't they have joined NATO under Boris Yeltsin? Why couldn't they have joined NATO?
Because we fundamentally do not want to be aligned with Russia.
So I'm sorry, Renee, but we understand that Russia is this sort of loose cannon and something we don't want to be aligned with. Mm-hmm. However, we're quite happy to do a deal with it when it comes to the fall of the Iron Curtain, and we're quite happy to have all of the sovereign nations around them join this Western alliance, but you're too unhinged to be involved in that. I mean, that is a recipe for trouble, isn't it?
Well, it is a recipe for trouble, but it is what we've done.
But you know what? This as a child, when his dad told him to get the first punch, there are people at the top of our sports hierarchy. Max Verstappen's dad left him at a petrol station when he was 8 to teach him a lesson for not putting enough petrol in his car. This is not the makings of a world despot. We've just decided that the West is good and Russia is bad, and anything outside of that cannot be countenanced.
We've decided that the scale and the scope of Russia, with the money, with the way that organised crime operates in close cahoots with the government, with the way that vulnerable LGBT people are treated abhorrently, with the existence of effectively modern-day gulags. These are not small things. They are all signs of something that we in the West do not believe, as democratic nations, we want to be aligned with.
But did we miss a massive opportunity then when Boris Yeltsin was prepared to hand over nuclear protocols to the West, when Boris Yeltsin was so pro the West, when in the days after Gorbachev? I mean, can we all agree, or maybe not, that did we miss a massive opportunity there to actually have brought Russia into the fold and have it as an ally? And perhaps some of those things that you have described that have come after that wouldn't have happened at all.
Well, all those things have always actually been there at some points in Russia's history.
But they have in many other Eastern European countries that no longer have those values.
Yes, that's absolutely true. But I mean, I think I probably would agree with you. We did miss a trick, and we're paying the price now.
Do you agree with that, Sophia?
I think we have missed many opportunities, but we have to deal with the situation that we have now. And we know that Putin has no regard for the rule of law. We know how he clears off his rivals politically. We know how he treats political prisoners. We know how he has disregard for human rights. So he is a despot, and we know that negotiating and trying to appease despots does not have a good track record.
Yeah, do you know, I actually don't disagree with where we are now and your analysis of where we are now. Well, I probably wouldn't have put it in your stark terms, Nikki, but I was saying before to Renee, and I just sort of wish that there would be some figure in the West that would say, you know what, he is awful and he's dreadful and what he's done is awful, but we should have foreseen this, and actually our hands aren't clean.
But I think people are saying that, aren't
they? I don't think they are.
No, but I also think the oxygen around this conflict is dying. The people are losing interest in it. The attention shifted very quickly to the situation in Israel and Gaza. And this is something rumbling on underneath, which looks like there is no end in sight. And I do think Zelensky at the beginning was capturing all the news headlines. I think he's going to struggle to continue making his case.
So if there is no end in sight, and I agree with you, there's no end in sight, should we not be talking peace? Even if, and I know it's unpalatable, that might involve Ukraine ceding a little bit of land. They already ceded Crimea and we did nothing.
I agree with that. I think we need to get them deciding the terms. We need to move with there. It shouldn't be led by America and the UK. Okay. It should be led by them.
All right. Listen, we're going to keep you if that's all right. Just up until 9. When we return, we'll talk winter fuel allowance, because apparently we've got money potentially for missiles, but not for pensioners. That's next on Talk. Morning, Christo here on Talks. Gossiping in the background, you two. I can hear you, honestly, the three of you. Chatter.
Put three women in a room.
It's the covenant here.
I keep order in this studio. Thank you very much indeed. You are, of course, listening to the ramblings, I'll say, of Dr. Rennie Undercamp and our head-to-head Nikki Hodgson, journalist and author, and Sophia Worringer, Deputy Worringer, yes,
well
Deputy
done.
Policy Director
right.
and Centre for Social Justice. OK, so we have a story on the front page of today's Telegraph that fixing Britain's worklessness crisis will take decades, according to Lord Rose, who is the chairman of ASDA, previously of Marks & Spencer's and Ocado, and the government should reform the benefits system to encourage more people into work. Meanwhile, we have billions being given away to other countries, nearly 12 billion when it comes to climate change and their preparedness for that, and we've got £10 billion given to the unions for pay rises, and that's only a couple of months into this government. So why, oh why, in the context of all of that, are this government going after the winter fuel allowance for pensioners, where it's been revealed this morning that 70% of those that are going to be adversely affected are disabled? Sophia?
So I think actually the desire to reform the winter fuel allowance allocation is not a bad one. It's a blunt tool. We don't have many other benefits that are distributed with no means test available. So I think they're trying to scale back government spend. That is an admirable thing. However, the problem we've had is we have a very dynamic and very effective benefit system, which includes pension credit. Those are people who are over the age of the retirement, which could be utilised to get the money that is needed to those who are most vulnerable. But we've had this new system that is outside of that is just giving a block amount of money away to anyone without a means test. I think it's not a bad idea to try and bring those together.
Again, though, you talk about the fact that it's a blunt instrument that gets given to pensioners, but any other benefit for people who are working age other than those who have, you know, maybe a long-term serious disability would be for someone who could perhaps top that up by getting more work. I mean, you know, if you're of working age and you're not earning enough, you could potentially work more, get a second job. You can't really do that if you're a pensioner. No,
but the state pension will go up by £420
but that's not
this
till
year.
Next year. No, that's
and that
next
is
April.
more
That's
than
after
what
this
they
winter.
take.
But that's after this winter.
No, but they know that it's coming.
Okay,
they can bank
sorry.
on that. People who are working can't necessarily.
No, I'm sorry. So you're actually materially wrong. So pensions in the triple lock go up in line with inflation, and that's why they've had in line with inflation. So
but wages don't.
So unless you're in the public sector and you get 22% for the doctors
yes,
and
true.
a 15% for the train drivers who already earn 65 grand. So their money has gone up in line with inflation, so they're no better off. They also do not have the opportunity to go to Starbucks and work an extra couple of shifts if they need to. £11,600 is what these pensioners are living on, and they don't qualify for pension credit. You try living on £11,600. It is a travesty.
No, I agree. There are people who are very vulnerable who are going to miss out, and I agree that is difficult. But what I'm saying is that it is not wrong to try and roll back some of the spend. However, what the Prime Minister is getting wrong, and I agree with Dr. Renee, is that at the moment pensioners are the only one being asked to make sacrifices. We've seen this with things like the council tax, which is also going to really hit those who are single occupancy pensioners really hard.
Yeah,
and the rest of the population don't seem to be asked to be making the sacrifice. That's why I think he's gone wrong. And I do think there's a bit of political vindictiveness in this, because in general people of that age cohort are more likely to vote Conservative, and therefore the Labour government are trying to appease their voter base and saying that they can afford to basically annoy the older generation.
This is why I have my personal campaign to bring back the poll tax.
Oh no, it's not personal, I'm with you.
Oh good, all right. What do you think, Nikki, that they're going after pensioners in the context of the billions that are going abroad, the billions that are going on people who are not able to work or not wanting to work? Surely it's a strange one to go off.
I think it's foolish. I don't disagree with the maths, I disagree with the optics. Because they're looking
Why is
like...
£1.5 billion in the maths? It's a drop in the ocean.
It's a drop in the ocean, but we still need to claw back however many billions that we've got to.
Why not only give £8 billion to the unions then, and so therefore that £2 billion could be balanced by the pensions?
Or why don't we tax corporations? Why don't we tax Facebook? Why don't we tax Meta in general? Why don't we tax people that have loads of money that we're too afraid to confront?
Wealth taxes unfortunately, in every single country that it's ever been tried, have been clawed back. Other than, I think, Switzerland is the only one that brought in a wealth tax, if you're talking about a wealth, as in assets you own. And that's because they don't have things like capital gains tax. And
we're talking about corporations. We're not talking about individual millionaires, billionaires.
Corporation tax, I think, it has gone up.
No, but they avoid it because they register in other places.
They pay pennies, Christo. They pay 2, 3, 4, 5% tax a year, these massive tech giants. And they're doing lots of damage to our society. They refuse to engage with us. They actually operate almost as autocratic states in the world. They're sort of like they've been elected. They've got more power than someone like Keir Starmer. That's how they present in our nations. And we have to go after them. He needs to be brave enough to go after them. I don't care about the pensioners. They're vulnerable people. Labour are looking like the nasty party.
I mean, I
fully agree.
One of the reasons why we are struggling so much to pay for the public services is because we have this growing benefits bill, which is set to rise by 10 billion over the next 5 years, and a huge proportion of that is being driven by those who are long-term sick, 2.8 million.
We also have a situation where we have low-skilled migrants who have been coming here for the last 20 or 30 years, and now the latest research is showing that by the time they reach 65, they've cost to the UK economy of £150,000. If they reach the age of 80, I think it goes up to about £1 million that they have taken in cost from the UK economy. So that would have been something that we could have addressed, wouldn't it?
Well, they're the facts that were led with in this story yesterday. The thing that was hidden, that also came from the OBR report, was the fact that the average migrant worker paid more in tax than they received in public benefits.
Right, but before you start talking about manipulating stats...
No, the average, Renee.
That's because that is actually pulled up by the high-skilled migrants who actually don't cost us anything.
They contribute to the economy, and apparently we want more of them. We have, restricted all kinds of visas, including skilled worker visas. We had a really good deal with India potentially on the table a few months back with Rishi Sunak, if you remember. India wanted some skilled worker visas for people to go into places like the NHS. We are absolutely crying out for those people, and Rishi Sunak said no as a point of principle because he didn't want it to look like he was bending to the will of a migrant nation.
Why wouldn't we then have a strategy where we say to somewhere like India, OK, you can get 3 years of visas because that will be the time it will take UK residents to learn how to get the skills to be working in the NHS. Why are we looking to any of these countries for skilled people as well as unskilled people?
Because exactly what you've just said. It takes, if you want skilled workers in the NHS, you have to train them.
We've been bringing them in for 30 years. We've been bringing in
But what's wrong with these skilled workers that do fantastic jobs? All my family are migrants. I'm married into a migrant family. My mother-in-law came here barely unable to speak English. She worked her whole life, worked really hard.
My father came here in exactly the same circumstances. So
you know the deal then.
Yes.
She's just received her pension because she's contributed enough to the economy to be allowed to have that pension, and she had multiple children. My husband ran a multi-million-pound business which he created, which he contributed to the economy. It's not just about the figure on someone's head. It's what they contribute in other ways.
It's also about culture and
infrastructure
and what that does to our society.
And I'm married into their family, and they're married into my family, and that's a bridging of cultures.
Very final word, Sophia.
I think in the conversation about migration, we always forget the different distinctions but what type of migrants we want in this country. We want the ones that have the economic gain, that are going to embed themselves in our culture and have that incredibly contribution in a very rich way. But unfortunately, because of the rhetoric and the high emotion around it, we lose the nuance.
I also think there's one big word that we have forgotten here, and it's going to be the last word, and that is infrastructure. And however much money we've ever got, we've never caught up with that, and housing and everything else. Thank you to you both.